My world shattered the moment I realized the whispers I heard weren't strangers. They were my own family. My name is Ellie Brooks. I'm 62 years old, and what I overheard in the back seat of my son's car still burns in my chest like ice. I thought I was surprising Nathan with the chocolate cake he's loved since childhood. Instead, hidden in the shadows, I listened as he and his wife Sloane calmly planned my death. "The balcony rail is already loose," Nathan said in a voice colder than I've ever known. "Perfect," Sloane replied. "One slip, and no one will question a thing." In that suffocating silence, I felt my heart beat louder than the engine. The son I sacrificed my whole life for was plotting to end mine, and that was only the beginning of the nightmare. I stayed crouched in the back seat, my hands gripping the cake box so tightly the cardboard bent beneath my fingers. My breath came in shallow bursts, terrified they would hear me. Every word that slipped from their mouths felt like a knife carving away the life I thought I knew. Nathan, my sweet boy, the child I once rocked to sleep through fevers and tears, was now speaking like a stranger, and Sloane, her voice sharp and controlled, was filled with a hunger that made my blood run cold. For a fleeting moment, I wanted to believe I had misunderstood, that my mind was twisting innocent words into horror. But then Nathan's tone hardened. "After the funeral, we'll sell the house. 600,000, plus her savings, plus the insurance. We'll finally live the life we deserve." The air was ripped from my lungs. That old house he spoke of was my temple of sacrifice, the place I scrubbed floors, cooked cheap meals, and prayed every night that he would have a better future. Tears blurred my vision as I pressed a trembling hand to my mouth. I could not let them hear me. Not now. Not until I figured out how to survive what I had just learned. Because in that instant I understood. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I had become their target, and somehow I had to stay alive long enough to expose them. That night, I drove home on trembling legs, headlights painting long shadows across the cracked pavement. The chocolate cake sat forgotten on the passenger seat. Its sweetness turned bitter in my mouth. My vision blurred with tears as I pulled into my driveway, the old wooden porch glowing faintly under the weak porch light. Inside, the silence was deafening. I lowered myself into the armchair where I had once read bedtime stories to Nathan, my hands still shaking. Sleep never came. Instead, memories stormed through my mind, relentless, merciless. I saw myself as a young widow, scrubbing hotel floors until my back ached, so Nathan could have school supplies. I remembered pawning my wedding ring, the last piece of Robert, to buy him the computer his teachers said he needed. I remembered nights when hunger gnawed at my stomach, but I placed the last plate of food in front of him, whispering, "Eat, my son." I'm not hungry, and now that same son was plotting my death for money. I pressed my hands to my face, a sob tearing out of me. Where did I go wrong? Was my love not enough? The clock ticked past midnight, each second heavier than the last. By dawn, my eyes were raw, my body hollowed, but somewhere deep inside, a fragile spark flickered, a whisper that said I could not give up. If I had survived poverty, widowhood, and endless sacrifice, then perhaps I could survive betrayal too. The drive home felt endless, even though the distance was barely a few miles. My fingers clutched the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles burned white. Beside me, the chocolate cake slid across the passenger seat with each turn. Its sweet frosting smeared against the box like a cruel joke. I had baked it with love, with the foolish hope of surprising my son. Now it sat there like evidence of a life that no longer existed. When I pulled into the driveway, the old wooden porch came into view, bathed in the pale yellow glow of the porch light I had forgotten to change for weeks. The house looked smaller, lonelier, as though it already knew what had been spoken inside that car. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The silence was suffocating. No laughter of a child running down the hall, no voice asking for homework help, no smell of birthday candles just blown out. Only the tick of the old wall clock filled the air, steady, merciless. reminding me of every second I had wasted believing in love that wasn't real. I sank into the faded armchair by the window, the one where I had rocked Nathan to sleep when he was a boy. The cushions sagged beneath me, shaped by decades of sacrifice. My hands trembled in my lap, still sticky from tears I had tried to wipe away in the car. Sleep refused to come. Instead, memories arrived, sharp, vivid, merciless. I saw myself at 27, standing in a dim hospital corridor, clutching Nathan's small hand as the doctor told me Robert, my husband, had died in a construction accident. His hard hat, cracked and bloodied, was the only thing they gave me back. That night Nathan cried until dawn, and I promised him with every ounce of strength I had left. Don't worry, my love. I'll take care of you, always. I remembered scrubbing hotel bathrooms until my knees went numb, carrying heavy buckets of bleach water until my back bent prominently. My hands cracked and bled, but I hid them behind gloves so Nathan wouldn't see. He needed shoes for school, so I skipped dinners. He needed books, so I pawned my wedding ring, the last memory of Robert's love. One image replayed endlessly. The day I placed a second-hand computer on Nathan's desk. His eyes lit up like Christmas morning, and he hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs would break. "Thank you, Mom," he shouted. That moment made every sacrifice feel worth it. And yet tonight, those same lips had coldly plotted my death. I pressed my palms to my face, muffling the sob that tore from my chest. Where did I go wrong? Wasn't my love enough? Didn't he see what I gave up for him? My tears dripped down into my lap, soaking the faded fabric of my dress. The hours dragged on. At midnight, the house creaked as if it too was awake, grieving with me. At 1, the refrigerator hummed, and I jumped as though it were a gunshot. At 2, the wind rattled the window frame and I shivered, imagining footsteps outside. I rose and wandered into the kitchen. The counters were worn smooth from years of chopping vegetables on a budget, stretching every dollar into meals. The walls still bore faint stains from when Nathan had spilled grape juice during a birthday party. I ran my hand across the surface, remembering how he used to sit on that very counter, swinging his legs while telling me about his dreams of becoming a lawyer. Dreams I had built for him, brick by brick, hour by hour, scar by scar. By 4 in the morning, exhaustion weighed on me, but sleep never came. Instead, an icy clarity began to form. If I had survived widowhood, poverty, in decades of relentless sacrifice, then perhaps I could survive this betrayal too. A fragile spark flickered in my chest. Small but stubborn. They think I am weak, that I will fall like an old woman on a broken stair, I whispered into the silence. But I am still alive, and as long as I am alive, I can fight. I stood by the window, watching the first gray light of dawn creep over the horizon. The world outside seemed indifferent. Cars passed, birds stirred, the city yawned awake. But inside me, something had shifted. I was no longer just a mother betrayed. I was a survivor preparing for war. By the following evening, my exhaustion had hardened into something darker, resolve. I couldn't sit in my house, waiting to be pushed downstairs or off a balcony. If I was going to understand how deep this betrayal ran, I needed to start with the people who knew me longest. That's how I found myself standing on the cracked front steps of my brother Curtis's house. The porch light buzzed weakly above me, moths circling in restless patterns. For a moment I hesitated. He was my brother, the boy who once defended me from bullies at school, who carried me on his shoulders when I was too tired to walk. But the memory of Raquel's voice in the car haunted me. Of course, Curtis and Denise are on board. I knocked. Curtis opened the door, surprise flickering across his face, before he masked it with a stiff smile. "Ellie, this is unexpected." His voice carried the guarded tone of someone caught off guard, not the warmth of a brother welcoming his sister. "Can I come in?" My voice was steady, but inside my chest, my heart pounded like a trapped bird. Denise was in the living room, perched on the sofa with her tablet, her manicured nails tapping against the glass screen. She looked up, her expression tight, almost annoyed. "Ellie, we weren't expecting company." "I know," I replied. lowering myself onto the edge of the sofa. That's kind of the point. For a moment the room was heavy with silence, broken only by the tick of a wall clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then I asked the question that had been burning in my mind all night. "Curtis, did you lose your job?" The color drained from his face. Denise's tablet slipped from her hands onto the coffee table with a dull thud. "Who told you that?" Curtis asked, his voice defensive, sharp. "It doesn't matter how I found out," I said softly. "What matters is why you didn't tell me. I'm your sister. If you needed help, I would have been there." Denise leaned forward, her lips curling into a bitter smile. "Help? Ellie, you've never helped anyone but yourself and that precious son of yours." Her words stung, but I forced myself to stay calm. "That's not true. Every dollar I earned, every sacrifice I made was for my family." "Your family?" Denise snapped. "Don't you mean Nathan? You poured everything into him while we struggled. You had savings, you had that house. But when Curtis asked for help with tuition years ago, you slammed the door in our faces. Don't act like you're some saint." Curtis shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't deny it. His silence cut deeper than any accusation. I stared at them, feeling as though the walls of the room were closing in. "So it's true," I whispered. "You're part of this plan." Curtis's eyes darted away, shame flickering across his features before hardening into something colder. "You don't understand, Ellie. We've been drowning. The mortgage, the bills, everything. Meanwhile, you've been sitting on a gold mine, your house, your savings, your insurance. Do you know what it feels like to watch your own sister live comfortably while we scrape by?" I shot to my feet, anger surging through me. "Comfortably? Curtis, I've bled for every cent I have. My hands are scarred. My back is broken because I worked 14-hour days so Nathan could have a chance. I sold my wedding ring to buy him a computer. Do you call that comfort?" Denise's eyes flashed with disdain. "You think you're noble, but really you're selfish. You chose Nathan over everyone else, and now? Now it's time the family gets what it deserves." Those words chilled me to my bones. I looked at Curtis, begging silently for him to contradict her, to say she was lying. But he didn't. His silence screamed louder than any confession. My chest tightened, breath catching as realization settled in. It wasn't just Nathan. It wasn't just Sloan. My own brother, bound to me by blood and childhood memories, was ready to betray me too. "I came here hoping I was wrong," I whispered, my voice breaking. "But I see now I was never family to you. I was just a bank account with a heartbeat." Curtis's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Denise crossed her arms, her expression smug, victorious. The room spun around me, my legs trembling beneath the weight of the truth. I turned toward the door, each step heavier than the last. As I reached for the handle, Curtis finally spoke, his voice low, almost regretful. "Ellie, you should just let this go. For your own good." I froze, my hand hovering over the doorknob. His words weren't advice. They were a warning. My heart hammered in my chest as I stepped out into the night air, the door closing behind me with a final, echoing thud. The betrayal wasn't just in my son's voice. It had spread like rot through my bloodline, and I realized with a cold clarity that the conspiracy to end my life was much bigger than I had ever imagined. The night I left Curtis's house, the air outside felt sharper, colder, as if the very wind carried betrayal in its teeth. I drove home in silence, headlights slicing through the darkness like a blade. Curtis's warning echoed in my mind. You should just let this go, for your own good. But letting go meant surrendering, to death, to lies, to the family who wanted me erased. And I refused. By the time I reached my front porch, I knew what I had to do. If no one would believe my words, then I needed proof. Cold, undeniable proof that my son, his wife, my brother, and Denise were conspiring against me. I had lived my entire life cleaning homes, stretching pennies, surviving storms. I had learned to notice details others overlooked, a misplaced object, a stain on a rug, the flicker of guilt in someone's eyes. Those instincts, sharpened by decades of survival, would now become my weapons. That night, I pulled out an old notebook I used to balance my meager budget. I drew a line down the center of the page and titled the columns, Suspicions and Evidence. Under suspicions, I listed every word I had overheard, every odd behavior in recent months. Under evidence, the page stayed blank for now. The next morning, I began my silent watch. I parked my aging sedan a block from Nathan and Sloane's sleek apartment building, my heart pounding as I adjusted the rearview mirror. The sun had barely risen, casting a golden haze over the glass towers, but I felt like a thief in daylight. My palms sweated as I scribbled notes in my notebook. 7:15 a.m. Nathan leaves in gray suit, briefcase. Sloane follows 10 minutes later. Car, white Lexus. Hours blurred as I sat there, nerves stretched thin. I jumped at every honk, every knock of a pedestrian against my car. But then, just before noon, I saw something that made my breath catch. Sloane returned alone, carrying shopping bags, her sunglasses hiding her eyes. She stepped inside with the sharp stride of someone who had nothing to fear. An hour later, Curtis arrived. He knocked once, looked around nervously, and slipped inside. I wrote it all down, my handwriting shaking across the page. Curtis visited. Stayed 47 minutes. When he finally left, I followed from a safe distance. My sedan rattled along the city streets as I trailed his newer SUV. My stomach churned with fear. What if he saw me? What if he confronted me? But Curtis never noticed. Instead, he drove straight to a small cafe downtown. Through the cafe's front window, I saw him sit across from Sloane. She smiled, leaned forward, and placed her hand over his. I couldn't hear their words, but their gestures painted the truth. Their alliance wasn't imagined. It was real, alive, and growing. My heart ached as I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel. Family ties, blood, marriage, woven together not by love, but by greed. I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo through the windshield, hands trembling. It wasn't much, but it was something. Evidence. That night, back at home, I spread my notes across the kitchen table, each scribbled detail a piece of a sinister puzzle. Beside them lay the photograph of Curtis and Sloane, their heads bent close in conspiracy. My notebook's evidence column was no longer empty. Still, fear gnawed at me. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Every shadow outside the window felt like eyes watching. I knew if they discovered I was onto them, I'd be silenced before I could ever tell my story. But fear, I realized, could be my ally. It kept me sharp, alive. I closed the notebook and whispered into the quiet kitchen. If they want to play a game, I'll play it better. I'll watch. I'll listen. And when the time comes, the truth will bury them, not me. The ticking clock on the wall sounded louder than ever, each beat like countdown. The war had begun, and for the first time, I wasn't just a victim. I was a hunter moving in the shadows. For days, I lived like a ghost in my own house. Curtains drawn, phones silenced, every creak of the floorboards making me jump. I replayed Nathan's recorded voice until it carved itself into my bones. My mother passed away suddenly. Proof of betrayal. Proof of danger. Proof that my time was running out. But proof meant nothing if I faced this alone. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon and the neighborhood dipped into twilight, I found myself staring at the house across the street. A warm glow spilled from the kitchen window, where a familiar silhouette moved with practiced grace. Mary Whitaker, my neighbor of 20 years, a retired nurse whose hands had stitched wounds and comforted dying patients, whose voice had always carried a calm that could soothe storms. I remembered the countless afternoons she had waved at me over the fence, the times she'd left soup on my doorstep when I was sick, the way she once told me, "Ellie, you're tougher than you know. If anyone could help me survive this nightmare, it was Mary." I clutched my notebook to my chest and crossed the street, each step heavy with both fear and fragile hope. When I knocked, the door opened almost instantly. Mary stood there, her silver hair pulled back neatly, her blue eyes sharp with recognition and concern. "Ellie," she breathed, pulling me inside. "My word, you look pale as death. What's happened? For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, tears threatening. But once I sat at her kitchen table, bathed in the warm glow of a single lamp, the smell of chamomile tea steeping, I broke. They're going to kill me. Mary! Her brows furrowed, but she didn't laugh or dismiss me. She simply placed her weathered hand over mine. Start from the beginning, and so I did. The overheard whispers in the car, Curtis and Denise's cold contempt, Nathan's voice on the insurance call. Every word spilled out raw and jagged until my chest heaved with sobs. When I finished, silence hung between us. Only the ticking of Mary's old clock filled the room. Finally, she squeezed my hand. "You're not crazy," she said firmly. "You're in danger, and you need a plan." Hope flickered like a fragile flame in my chest. "I don't know where to start," I admitted. "I have notes, recordings, but I'm just one woman. They're younger, stronger, and already convinced I'm as good as dead." Mary's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes calculating. "I spent 30 years in hospitals, Ellie. I know how to make people believe what they see, even when it's not the truth. Vital signs, medications, timing. If they want you to have an accident, maybe we give them one. On your terms." I blinked, stunned. "You mean fake my death?" Her gaze didn't waver. "It's risky. But if we do it right, it could buy us time. Time to gather more evidence. Time to expose them before they strike again." The thought chilled me. Yet strangely, it also ignited something inside. Control. For the first time, the idea that I might not have to wait helplessly for their attack. "But Mary," I whispered, fear tightening around me. "What if it goes wrong? What if I really die?" Her hand tightened around mine, steady and sure. "Then we make damn sure it doesn't go wrong." Tears blurred my vision, not just from fear, but from the weight lifting ever so slightly off my chest. For weeks, I had carried this nightmare alone. Now someone believed me. Someone was willing to stand beside me in the shadows. Mary rose and poured the tea, setting the steaming cup in front of me. "Drink. You'll need your strength. Because if your family thinks you're weak, they're about to learn how wrong they are." I wrapped my fingers around the mug, letting the warmth seep into my bones. For the first time in days, the icy terror eased, replaced by a fragile, flickering hope. As I sipped, I glanced at my notebook lying open on the table. The evidence column no longer felt like a lonely battle. With Mary beside me, each scribbled line could become part of a larger strategy. A fight not just to survive, but to win. The night outside pressed against the windows. But here in Mary's kitchen, bathed in the soft glow of lamplight, I felt something I thought I had lost forever, a chance. The following morning, I woke to a rare feeling, purpose. The fear still coiled in my chest like a snake, but Mary's words from the night before echoed in my mind. If they want an accident, we give them one. On your terms. For the first time since I had crouched in Nathan's car, I wasn't waiting for death to find me. I was planning to outwit it. Mary welcomed me into her kitchen, a yellow notepad spread across the table, her handwriting neat and deliberate. She had already drawn columns labeled risks, supplies, and timing. Her years in hospitals showed in every stroke of the pen, methodical, unflinching. "We need to make this look natural," she began, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. "Something common for a woman your age. Something no one would question." I swallowed hard. "A heart attack?" Mary nodded. "It's believable. It happens quickly, and I know how to mimic the vital signs. But Ellie, you must understand, this is dangerous. If the dosage isn't exact, you won't wake up." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. Still, I forced myself to nod. Better a dangerous plan than no plan at all. She tapped her pen against the notepad, eyes narrowing. "Here's what we'll need. A sedative strong enough to lower your pulse, a beta blocker to mimic arrhythmia, and adrenaline on standby to bring you back. I can still get them quietly through old contacts." I felt my throat tighten. Medications, dosages, timing. It all sounded so clinical, so final. "And after?" I asked. "Once I'm dead?" Mary leaned forward, her voice lowering. "I'll be the one to call 911. I'll guide the paramedics, steer their assumptions. With the right presentation, your body, your breathing shallow, skin pale, they'll believe what they see. They'll pronounce you gone. I pressed my trembling hands against the table, the wood grain digging into my palms. And then, you'll be taken to the hospital morgue, Mary said, her tone calm, as though she were explaining a recipe. I'll have a trusted contact waiting, a pathologist who owes me a favor. He'll falsify the certificate, mark it down as cardiac arrest. No questions. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thick with the weight of her words. I was listening to the logistics of my own death, spoken with the precision of a nurse who had seen too many real ones. And where will I go while the world thinks I'm gone? I whispered. Mary's eyes softened. Here, my basement has a room no one uses. You'll stay hidden until we've gathered enough evidence to expose them. I tried to imagine it. Me, lying in a morgue drawer, cold and motionless, while my family divided my belongings. My stomach churned, bile rising in my throat. Mary reached across the table, her hand steady on mine. Ellie, listen to me. You've survived worse than this. Poverty, grief, betrayal. This isn't the end. It's the beginning of their end. I nodded, my eyes stinging with tears. Then we do it. We spent hours sketching the details, our whispers weaving a tapestry of deception. What day to choose? Sunday, when Nathan and Sloane were at their weekly brunch. What clothes I should wear. A familiar dress, one they would recognize, so the image of my death would be seared into their minds. Where to collapse? My living room, where the neighbors could testify they had seen me alive just hours before. Every contingency was considered. What if the paramedic was too experienced? Mary rehearsed lines, her voice trembling just enough to sound like a grieving neighbor. She wasn't breathing. She clutched her chest. It was so sudden. What if someone demanded an autopsy? Mary's pathologist contact had the authority to waive it under natural causes. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the notepad was filled with plans, arrows, and underlined warnings. It looked less like a blueprint for survival and more like the script of a heist film, except the prize wasn't money. It was my life. As I gathered my things to leave, Mary handed me a small vial. The liquid inside glimmered faintly under the kitchen light. This, she said, is step 1, a trial dose. We'll test it, see how your body reacts. We can't afford mistakes. The vial felt heavier than stone in my hand. My future, my survival, my revenge, all of it rested on a single fragile bottle. I slipped it into my purse, my pulse thundering as I walked home under the deepening night sky. The street lights cast long shadows across the pavement. For the first time, I didn't shrink from them. I wasn't just running from my family anymore. I was preparing to rise from the dead. The vial sat on my nightstand all night, catching the faint glow of the street lamp through the blinds. I barely slept, my eyes locked on that tiny bottle, as though it contained not liquid, but fate itself. By morning, my nerves were shredded, yet I knew there was no turning back. If I wanted to survive my family's plan, I first had to survive my own. Mary greeted me at her door with a grave expression, ushering me quickly inside. Her kitchen table had been transformed into a makeshift clinic. Blood pressure cuff, stethoscope, stopwatch, syringes. She moved with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times, though never under circumstances like these. Ellie, she said, her voice steady but firm. We'll start with a small dose, just enough to lower your vitals. I'll monitor everything. If anything feels wrong, I'll bring you back immediately. I nodded, though my stomach churned violently. And if it works? Mary's eyes flickered with determination. Then we'll know we can fool them. I sat down, the chair creaking under my weight, and rolled up my sleeve. My hands trembled as Mary prepared the syringe, the liquid glinting under the light. She pressed it into my arm with a practiced hand. The world seemed normal at first. Then the edges began to blur. My heartbeat slowed, each thud echoing in my ears like a drum fading down a long tunnel. My breathing turned shallow, chest rising barely enough to draw air. A cold sweat broke across my forehead. and the room tilted slightly as though gravity itself had shifted. Pulses dropping, Mary murmured, eyes locked on the cuff. 60, 55, steady, steady. I wanted to tell her I was fine, but my tongue felt heavy, useless. My lips parted, but no sound came. Panic clawed up my throat. What if the dose was too strong? What if this was the last sunrise I'd ever see? Darkness crept at the edges of my vision, closing in like curtains. My body felt distant, foreign, as though I were watching myself from above. "Stay with me, Ellie," Mary urged, her hand gripping mine tightly. Her voice sounded far away, muffled as though underwater. I thought of Nathan. His first steps across the kitchen floor. The way he used to tug my sleeve at night, asking me to read just one more story. I thought of Robert, gone too soon, his smile fading into memory. Was this how it ended? After decades of sacrifice, would I die here in Mary's kitchen trying to outwit the very people I had loved most? A tear slipped from the corner of my eye. My chest grew heavier, my pulse. "Slower, 48, Mary muttered, alarm flashing in her eyes. She reached for the syringe of adrenaline she had prepared in advance. "Not yet," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "Just a little longer." The darkness pressed closer. My ears filled with silence. And then nothing. For a single terrifying moment, I felt suspended in a void. No heartbeat, no breath, just emptiness. Then with a violent jolt, my chest convulsed. Air tore into my lungs like fire. My eyes snapped open, vision swimming, and I gasped, choking on the flood of life rushing back. Mary was leaning over me, her face pale but determined, her stethoscope pressed hard against my chest. Relief washed over her features. "Pulse is back. 82. You scared the life out of me, Ellie." I coughed, clutching at her arm. My body trembled, drenched in sweat, but I was alive. Barely. Mary sank into the chair beside me, exhaling shakily. "It worked. God help us, it actually worked." I lay back, every nerve in my body tingling with the memory of that void. I had touched the edge of death and returned, and in that moment one truth crystallized. I could do this. I could vanish, convince the world of my death, and rise again to destroy the people who wanted me gone. Still shaking, I met Mary's eyes. "Next time," I whispered, my voice raw, "we won't just be testing. Next time, we make them believe it." The clock on her wall ticked steadily, each beat a reminder of how close I had come, and how much closer I would have to get before this was over. The week after the trial run felt like a countdown. Little things began to shift around me. The cadence of my son's calls, the way Denise stopped by to check on the house more often than necessary, the furtive glance Curtis gave when he thought I wasn't looking. The world I had once trusted was tightening like a noose. I watched them from the quiet corners of my life. Nathan took fewer evenings at the office and more late-night phone calls. Sloane stopped pretending to be clumsy. She moved with purpose now. Curtis's visits grew longer, each stay leaving the house rearranged, drawers left slightly ajar, as if to test what was hidden. I kept my small victories in a battered notebook and the recording of Nathan's voice in 3 different places. Evidence was power, but evidence had to be timed. Mary came over on a gray Wednesday with a face I had never seen before, resolute, practical, edged with sorrow. "They're accelerating," she said without preamble, laying her palm flat on the notepad where we had sketched our plan. I intercepted a message on my way here. Curtis told Denise to make sure Thursday is clear. They've penciled in the weekend for whatever they're planning. We have to move now. The word "now" tasted like iron. I folded and refolded the small scarf around my wrist, feeling the tremor beneath my fingers. We had rehearsed, we had tested, we had contingency plans for the paramedic and for the certificate, but rehearsals were different from the real thing. Real meant forever. "We picked Sunday," I said finally, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "They always go to brunch on Sundays. Their schedule is as reliable as a clock. If they expect me to be a burden on Sunday afternoon, that's when they will let their guard down." Mary nodded, fingers tracing the columns we had filled with possibilities and pitfalls. "We'll go through it once more. Tonight I'll call in the favors. The people who can make sure an autopsy is unlikely. The nurse who will stage the scene. But Ellie, you understand the risk. Once you're pronounced, the world will change. There will be no easy backtracking. I looked at the photograph on the table, Nathan laughing over coffee so many summers ago with frosting on his lip. The unsecured porch step that had once been repaired by my hands. Then out at the window, where the streetlights hummed like distant watchmen. Everything in me bristled against the thought of giving up control to them. If my death could expose their cruelty and buy my safety, then the gamble was worth the terror. The preparations that night were almost ritualistic. We dressed the living room in the familiar tableau that would make our performance unquestionable. The same throw blanket, the same reading lamp, the cake box tucked away, memory props that would stitch reality and theater together. Mary coached me on my breathing, my facial slackening, how to make shallow breaths appear natural. She practiced with the 911 script until each line sounded like a neighbor's panicked plea, rather than a rehearsed lie. As dusk fell, I went through the motions of ordinary living, watering the kitchen plant, straightening the coasters, humming an off-key lullaby that used to put Nathan to sleep. Doing the mundane felt both normalizing and dangerous. Every ordinary act was part of a larger deception. I set my phone on silent in the drawer and left 2 voicemails on Nathan's line. One a mundane, "I love you," and another a reminder about the house keys. Small breadcrumbs to make the world believe I lived the life I always had, until I didn't. When Sunday came, the house smelled like lemon and old pages. My heart hammered, but my hands were steady as I walked to the living room and sat under the lamp where Mary could see me through the slightly ajar door. The script we had written together lay on the coffee table like a pact. The knock came at 2:30. Curtis's familiar double rap, the one he used when he visited. I opened the door and let them in, smiling in a way that felt like steel disguised as kindness. They settled, Josiah's cup clinked, and their conversation slipped into the predictable pattern of small talk, sliced with practical questions about the house and the will. Sloane kept glancing at the staircase. Curtis kept scanning the room, looking at every surface. At the cue we'd rehearsed, I rose slowly as if a wave of dizziness had come over me. My knees buckled. I clutched at the lamp, and Mary, already in the wings, hurried in, her face the image of alarm. "She collapsed," she cried, voice raw, pitch perfect. Nathan was up in a flash, hands on my shoulders. The room blurred into a carousel of frantic movement. Phone calls, a neighbor's concerned voice, the distant wail of a siren approaching. They believed it. The paramedics believed it. I felt the world tilt, and for a terrifying span, everything went very quiet inside me. Then the sound of Mary's voice, steady and authoritative, anchored me as she directed the scene, framing the narrative for the responders. I lay very still, the air cool on my face, while the house filled with a staged sorrow that felt too bitter to be faked. As they carried me out in a sheet of practiced grief, I listened to Nathan's voice, brittle and hurried. "She's gone." It was so sudden. The words were a hammer blow, but they rang true to every ear in the street. Outside, the cameras of a passing news crew turned like vultures catching scent. The world had a story before the dust had settled. Mary's eyes met mine for a moment, a silent exchange. We had crossed into the final act. My chest thudded against the fabric of my borrowed stillness. The plan had taken us here, and now the waiting began. The waiting for them to reveal their true faces, and for the law and the world to see. As the ambulance doors shut and the siren carried us away, I mouthed the single prayer I'd been saving. Hold on. Let them show themselves. The hospital morgue was colder than I had imagined. Beneath the sterile hum of fluorescent lights, I lay still, my body hidden under a white sheet. To the world, Eleanor Brooks had died of a sudden heart attack. To me, it was the beginning of my resurrection. Mary's friend at the hospital, an older pathologist named Dr. Warren, had signed the certificate without hesitation. Cardiac arrest. Expected at her age. His words slid into the system like keys turning a lock. No suspicion. No questions. The world now believed I was gone, and that was when my family's true faces began to show. From Mary's laptop in the basement, I watched through discreetly placed cameras as Nathan and Sloane entered my home the very next morning. No mourning clothes, no hushed voices. Instead, they moved with the precision of burglars who already knew the layout. Sloane flung open the jewelry box I had kept since my wedding, lifting each piece with a smirk. Cheap but sentimental, she muttered, tossing a necklace back with disdain. Nathan, meanwhile, rifled through my desk drawer, pulling out bank statements. Here it is. Checking, savings, insurance policies. His voice trembled, not with grief, but with excitement. 150,000 combined, plus the house, plus the payout. We're set. Curtis and Denise arrived minutes later, their expressions naked with greed. Curtis rubbed his hands together. Finally, after all these years, I felt bile rise in my throat as I watched them settle around my dining table, my table, where I had once served birthday cakes and Thanksgiving dinners, and begin dividing me like property. Sale of the house should clear 600,000, Curtis said, tapping on a notepad. Split 4 ways, that's 4 ways. Sloane cut in, her smile sharp. You and Denise get your quarter, but Nathan and I are handling the funeral, the legal work, the insurance claim. We deserve the larger share. Their voices rose, overlapping, barbed with entitlement. Not a single tear was shed, not a single memory honored. My 30 years of sacrifice had been reduced to a ledger. Mary, sitting beside me in the basement, shook her head in disgust. They don't even realize they're burying themselves in their own words. This is evidence now, Ellie. Pure evidence. Her reassurance steadied me, but only slightly, because as I listened, my family dug themselves deeper, not knowing the world had ears. Across town, a different storm brewed. News of my sudden death had spread quickly. An obituary posted by a cousin, whispers through the church community. And then the questions started. Neighbors left flowers on my porch, muttering about how healthy I had seemed. The grocery clerk told a reporter, she was always walking, always lively. I saw her just last week. The local paper ran a short piece. Community shocked by sudden death of beloved neighbor. It was meant to be kind, but buried beneath the sympathy was suspicion. People who had known me for decades couldn't reconcile the narrative of frailty with the reality they'd witnessed. And then, the first crack. A neighbor caught Curtis and Sloane on camera hauling boxes from my house late at night. The footage landed on social media. 2 figures laughing, struggling with bags clearly stuffed with belongings. The caption read, "Is this grief?" The clip spread like wildfire. Comments piled in. Looks more like looting than mourning. If that was my mom, I'd be on the floor crying, not carrying boxes. Something's not right with this family. Justice, or karma, had begun its slow march. I sat in the basement, trembling with a mixture of rage and grim satisfaction. My family believed they had won, that the world pitied them while they built a new life on my ashes. But already suspicion was creeping in, planting seeds I would soon harvest. They're exposing themselves, Mary whispered, her eyes fixed on the screen. And when the time comes, we won't even need to push. They'll fall by their own weight. For the first time, I smiled through the tears. I wasn't just waiting for revenge anymore. I was watching justice gather, silent and patient, ready to strike. The day of my return came sooner than I imagined. The scandal had spread, neighbors whispering, reporters circling, strangers dissecting grainy footage of my family, carrying boxes like scavengers. Yet Nathan and the others pressed forward with their performance of grief, planning a funeral service designed more for appearances than remembrance. They never expected the guest of honor to attend. Mary and I chose the church deliberately, the same small chapel where Nathan had been baptized, where Robert's funeral had been held decades earlier. Its stained glass windows spilled light like fire across the pews. Reporters gathered outside, drawn by rumors of family greed. Cameras lined the back, hungry for spectacle. Curtis stood near the pulpit, rehearsing his eulogy in low tones. Denise fussed with the floral arrangements. Sloane wore black silk, her expression somber but her eyes gleaming with calculation. And Nathan, my son, my betrayer, stood at the center, shaking hands, thanking mourners with practiced sorrow. I waited in the side vestibule, hidden in the shadows, my heart hammering as Mary squeezed my arm. "This is it," she whispered. "When you step out there, you take back your name, your life, your power." The organ began its slow hymn. The congregation hushed. Nathan stepped up to the lectern, his voice ringing through the vaulted ceiling. "My mother was a strong woman," he began, his tone rich with false sentiment. "She sacrificed everything for me, and though her passing was sudden, we take comfort in the life insurance and legacy she left behind." Gasps rippled through the crowd at his slip, but before he could recover, I stepped into the aisle. The sound of my heels on the tile echoed like thunder. Heads turned, murmurs erupted. Some rose to their feet, jaws slack. And then Nathan saw me. His words froze in his throat. "Hello, Nathan," I said, my voice steady, carrying across the pews. "Didn't expect to see me today, did you?" His face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping on land. Sloane clutched his arm, eyes wide with disbelief. Curtis dropped his note cards, scattering them across the floor. Denise whispered, "Impossible." But I was there, alive. I walked slowly down the aisle, every step deliberate, every eye locked on me. "I hear you've been busy," I continued, my gaze sweeping over them. "Dividing my house, counting my money, filing insurance claims." A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd. Reporters leaned forward, cameras flashing. "Lies," Nathan blurted finally, his voice breaking. She's not real. This is a trick." I stopped just feet from him, pulling the small recorder from my purse. With a click, his voice filled the chapel. "Yes, this is Nathan Brooks. I'm calling about a life insurance claim. For my mother, Eleanor Brooks." Gasps erupted like a wave. People turned to Nathan, their faces twisted with horror. The words hung in the air, undeniable, damning. Sloane tried to snatch the recorder, but I pulled back, my voice sharper now. "You declared me dead before I ever left this world. You plotted, you schemed, you tore apart the very woman who gave you life, all for money." Nathan's composure shattered. "You don't understand," he stammered. We had debts. Debts?" My voice rose, years of pain pouring into every syllable. "I worked until my body broke so you could eat. I pawned my wedding ring so you could learn. I gave you everything, Nathan. And this is how you repaid me." Silence fell, heavy, unbreakable. Even the organist's hands froze above the keys. Reporters surged forward, microphones flashing, questions firing. "Mrs. Brooks, are you saying your son staged your death? Nathan, do you deny these recordings?" Nathan faltered, his mask collapsing as sweat beaded across his brow. Sloane hissed at him to run, but the congregation had already closed in. My neighbors, my community, the same people who had doubted my sudden death, were now witnesses to my resurrection. I turned to the crowd, my voice breaking but resolute. "I was dead to them long before today, but I'm alive now, and I won't be silenced again." The cameras flashed like lightning, illuminating Nathan's pale, stunned face. The world had seen. The truth was no longer hidden. For the first time in months, I breathed fully, the air sharp and clean in my lungs. I had risen, and they had fallen. The days that followed my resurrection unfolded like a storm. The chapel scene spread across every screen, clips of me walking down the aisle, Nathan's ashen face, the recording that echoed through the rafters. Reporters called it the funeral that became a trial, and soon it did. Police arrived within hours of the service. The insurance company, blindsided by Nathan's fraudulent claim, turned over every document he had filed. The so-called death certificate became Exhibit A in a growing case of conspiracy, fraud, and attempted homicide. Curtis and Denise, caught on camera hauling my belongings, were brought in for questioning. Sloane, cold and defiant, tried to spin the story. But her emails, full of meticulous plans and timelines, told the truth louder than she ever could. One by one, their lies unraveled. Nathan, once the bright boy I had sacrificed everything for, now sat in a courtroom in shackles. His voice shook as he pleaded guilty to insurance fraud, his eyes avoiding mine. Curtis and Denise faced charges of conspiracy and theft. Sloane, whose sharp tongue had once guided their schemes, was indicted alongside them. The world that had pitied them at my funeral now pitied me, and with that pity came outrage. Strangers sent letters, neighbors brought flowers. Even reporters who had once doubted me now wrote of my endurance, my strength. But the real weight of it all wasn't in their punishment. It was in the silence of my own house, the quiet after the storm, where I finally let myself breathe again. One evening, Mary sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where the notebook of evidence still lay, now marked with the word closed scrolled across its final page. She poured me tea and said softly, "You've done more than survive, Ellie. You've changed the story." Her words lingered. Changed the story? Yes, I had. Because survival wasn't just about living through the danger. It was about reclaiming the narrative. About refusing to be erased by the very people who should have loved me most. And that is the lesson I want to leave with you. The one watching, listening, maybe carrying your own silent burdens. I know what it feels like to be betrayed by the people closest to you. To wonder if love was ever enough. To sit awake at night, staring at the walls, asking yourself, where did I go wrong? But here's the truth I learned on the edge of death. You are stronger than their betrayal. You are more than their greed, their lies, their cruelty. They cannot define your worth, no matter how loudly they try. I walked into my own funeral and faced down the people who wanted me gone. And though they stripped me of everything, my home, my safety, my trust, they could not take my will to stand. So if you are sitting in the dark, feeling forgotten, doubting your own strength, let my story remind you, you can rise. You can write the ending, not them. Justice may come slowly, but it comes. And sometimes, it begins the moment you decide that your life, your truth, your voice matters enough to fight for. As for me, I don't know what the future holds. My house feels different now, quieter but not empty. It holds echoes of sacrifice, yes, but also proof that love, real love, the kind we give freely, is never wasted, even if it's betrayed. I step outside each morning and feel the sun on my face brighter than it ever seemed before, and I whisper the same words to myself that I now whisper to you. You are not gone. You are still here, and as long as you are here, there is hope.